Can you explain how you develop the skills academically or otherwise to undertake that job role?
Yeah, for sure. So I've had an exciting sort of, I guess, educational trajectory in the sense of I've always kind of zigzagged alongside the path that I've ended up following. Some people when they're younger, they know exactly what they want to do, and it's from point A to point B, and they just zip straight along. The way that I've sort of thought about moving forward in my life is always like if you're drawn to something and you're not sure why, that's probably a really good sign. So I've always ended up kind of jumping back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, but heading towards that point B. So academically, my undergraduate degree is actually a Bachelor in Fine Arts, and that was one of my favorite educational experiences. Because there's a lot of stereotypes about people who are educated in the arts, whether that's creative writing, studio arts, music, things like that. There's lots of stereotypes about like, well, why would you pursue that at whether it's a vocational college or university level. And for myself, what I was finding was here's a medium or a vehicle for learning and a vehicle for communication that I really enjoy and I connect with. And I'm able to learn about all these major world events, all these philosophical shifts in thinking, both in, like Europe but also different regions of the world and the globe, and a more holistic sense of, the world in a sense. So I found that to be very rewarding. I was able to work with my hands. And then through that 4-year degree, I started to get drawn towards more sort of art theory, but also collection theory. So all of these museums that not only house art, but also house, artifacts and things like that from all over the world. Well, like, why are they here and not where they came from? And sort of thinking about, sort of the colonial impulse to hoard things and steal things, and how even though museums can be really engaging to walk into, maybe they're just engaging for you to walk into because it represents sort of this colonial narrative that you are a part of. Whereas it might be a very uncomfortable experience for somebody who is looking at their heritage behind glass being spoken about incorrectly, perhaps in most cases stolen from where it originally came from. So that's where I sort of decided to take my master's education. So I did both of my university degrees at the University of Western Ontario, which is in London, Ontario. In my master's degree, it was an art history master's. And what I focused on through my art history master's was, once again, this museum, museum studies, museum culture, and in a contemporary sense, how that related to art within Canada. And from there, so this is like the zigzag. I started in studio art. Then I moved into sort of more museum studies. I was very fortunate to have been given an internship at the Museum of Anthropology in British Columbia, which is on the west coast of Canada. And they have one of the most progressive institutions in Canada, I would say, as far as it goes with, being constantly engaged with community members that the items within the museum represent. Working very hard to have a equitable and respectful relationship with Indigenous peoples in Canada, as well as globally. So I was able to do a museum collections sort of internship there, which was amazing. After that point, I was able to go and work in South Africa on behalf of the Commonwealth Association of Museums with Iziko Museums, which is one of the national museums in South Africa, and help with a project to identify unethically acquired ancestral remains within the collection. So this was a project about opening up the museum to Indigenous people in South Africa, in the sense of locating people who had been collected as objects, which is, it's a horrifying history. It's a very hard and impacting sort of subject to be working very closely with, especially as an outsider who is a representative of, a colonial community. It was a very sort of eye-opening and humbling experience, which I felt very fortunate to be a part of. So yeah, that's kind of outside of my current job role. That's sort of where I went. I worked at a flower shop for a while in there too, which perhaps isn't, and you know, like it wasn't like a university thing or an education thing, but that's like another job that I did on my zigzag, and I loved that too. So like just I'm all over the road is basically what I'm saying.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much. And so with all of that in mind, can you tell us a little bit about your most recent publication?
For sure. Yeah, it's from my work with the Commonwealth Association of Museums and Iziko Museums in South Africa. My sort of project supervisor, Dr. Wendy Black, and myself contributed an article to Working with and for the Ancestors, which was a publication that has been put out through some PhD students at Simon Fraser University. And it's a really great book. I was very honored to have been asked to contribute to it. Just going through and reading the other the other articles that have been submitted. It's amazing to hear about all the different kinds of projects that are going on a global sort of scale. The article that Dr. Black and I had submitted is entitled "The Southern African Human Remains Project: Making Preparations in Year One." The project that I was working on ended up being a 3-year project run through CAN. So we were able to talk about sort of from a more practical sense, what was involved in the first year of the project and identifying some inadequacies within museums, I would argue in general, when they are attempting to begin a dialogue with people who, largely may feel excluded or are actively excluded from museum collections, particularly with something so, sacred and so sensitive as dealing with one's ancestors. So yeah, like it was not my first scholarly publication, I suppose, but it was definitely the first where I felt what I was describing was very sensitive, and there was a certain delicacy about the process of writing it, and I felt very honored to be writing about it. So I was very pleased with sort of it being published and how it all turned out. But,
Fantastic. Yeah, thank you very much. That's really interesting. Thank you for talking us through that.